Hey, Bernie Dog here. This might end up being kind of a long story, but I bet you'll find it interesting if you stay patient. The stove you're looking at right now is the British Military No. 12. This stove is mostly made of stainless steel. It's got a stainless steel welded tank, a solid stainless steel box. These stoves were used in British military vehicles. Apparently, the British military needs a lot of tea. So these high-performance, high-output stoves can boil a lot of water really fast. Originally intended to burn JP8, a kerosene-like diesel-ish sort of fuel, these stoves have been turning up on the surplus market for a dozen years now. It comes with tools, a funnel, and everything you need to get going if you need to boil a lot of water. Among stove collectors, it's quite popular. And it's certainly not something you'll backpack with at about 11 pounds or 5 kilograms. It burns kerosene, it's super rugged, and it's a great vehicle stove that is really stout and will last a long time. You can even stand on the case. But what it's not is quiet. Way back in 2013, when I was still hand-building caps, I made a special cap for this stove called the Top Dog, by hand from tubing and sheet metal. These caps are the largest and most complicated caps I ever made, with over 400 holes. But they did a good job of keeping the stove quiet. I made 8 of them. When I began producing caps using 3D manufacturing, I also designed and produced a 3D model of the Top Dog cap. However, I did not start selling it until recently because another fellow in Taiwan began making his own. I bought one of his originally and I liked it a lot. I even did a whole video all about the cap where I promoted it, and that video has been up for the last 8 years on YouTube. Unfortunately, the folks in Taiwan are no longer making the cap in the same way. I was contacted by some of the fellows in the United Kingdom who said that they'd been having problems with this cap from Taiwan that I promoted on my YouTube site. And I should note, I never made any money from any of the sales of this cap in Taiwan. It was strictly a courtesy to have it on my site. Even though their number 12 seemed to operate just fine with the flame plate, they couldn't seem to get them to work with the cap. I volunteered to take a look at one of those caps with its burner from the United Kingdom and offered to pay part of the shipping so I could take a look at it. And the rest of this video is going to be pretty much about what I discovered and how I made the cap work better. As usual, the first step when I get a new stove or stove part is to clean it up and make sure that it's in good condition. These are some of the befores. I removed the spindle and all the spindle parts and rebuilt those, rebuilt the burner, and I also did a heat and air clean. Familiar with heat and air cleaning, it involves heating the burner while putting a small amount of air through the burner, which burns away any coke deposits that may be inside. For those who may be interested, it required me to make a special adapter for the unusual 1/2 inch by 19 threads per inch thread on the British military burner. Once cleaned and reassembled, I was able to go ahead and test the burner and see that everything was okay with it as it is. Comparing my original Taiwan cap from 2013 to the new version of the cap, I discovered that the outer cap was smaller in diameter by about 1 to 2 millimeters inside diameter. The inner cap, however, was exactly the same size as the 2013 model. This means that the space for fuel air vapor to travel is much reduced. And an additional complication is that the holes that are punched in the outer cap have definite chads hanging inside the cap, which further reduce the clearances. Now that's an easy fix. I put it on the lathe and removed the chads using abrasive paper and high-speed turning. Because I'm a cap builder and I'm used to the idea of counting holes and rows of holes and figuring all that stuff out, I was able to figure out that the original version of the cap had substantially more holes in it than the new version of the cap. This reduction in total area outflow from the old cap to the new cap means that this cap is simply not going to be able to handle the high power of the British No. 12 stove. The Taiwan seller seems to want to solve this by giving you a jet to reduce the power of your stove. That's not the way I do things. Since I can't add holes, I'm stuck with trying to enlarge some of those holes to make up the difference. And what I did is I calculated out the total outflow of both caps and then figured out what I would need to do to adjust it to make the outflow the same. By drilling the lowest row of holes to match a number 55 drill and the other holes in the cap to a 56 drill diameter, I figured out that it would come out about the same in total outflow area. After drilling those 216 holes by hand, I gave it a test. At this point, I had mostly solved the problem at medium and high flows. However, at low flows, there was still a problem with fuel-air flow. At low flows, there's a problem with fuel-air flow because there isn't enough space between the inner and outer cap. So I put the inner cap on my lathe on one of my handmade mandrels and shaved off about a millimeter and a half on the diameter, which gave me a little more room for fuel air to flow between the inner and outer cap. Now, about this time, I got an email from the fellow in the UK who was telling me his stove is mostly used in the garden. He likes to run it at simmer for long periods of time with a kettle of water on it, only turning it up to high when he needs it to boil for a brew up. Now that I recognized this stove was going to be used mostly at simmer, I needed to come up with a way to make the heat stay around the burner, and that involved taking a simple quick fix by cutting up an old soup can into a windshield. I also then found out that he said that the burner sat too high for his stove. I don't have that problem. So, not knowing what that's about, I figured it was time to give it a test. Wintertime temperatures and weather conditions in where I live is very similar to what they are in much of the UK, I am told. Since this stove was going to be used in a garden in the out of doors in inclement weather, I chose a day when it was 48 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees centigrade and did this test on my back porch. As with any silent burnered kerosene stove, you don't want to crank it up to full right away. You want to let that burner develop a little heat first. The original video these are cuts from was 35 minutes long. These are just segments. And in a little while, you'll see me start up with a stopwatch, and you can track that. Here we are going at pretty much full flame right about now. This early stage, you may notice a gentle pulsing. That's because the burner has not completely gotten up to temperature. Mostly in the feed tube is not hot enough yet, so there's a little bit of pulsing there. The cleaning needle's working fine. Here we are at 10 minutes. The burner's good enough by now, and it's time to start testing that low simmer for an extended time. Sadly, not quite as low as I'd like. I wasn't sure whether this was climatic or not, but I made some little tweaks later on to improve that. You'll see that in a bit. Here we are 10 minutes later, and it's time to bring it back up from simmer to full blast. Slow and careful is the way to go. Don't just boop it all the way. So after my outside tests, I brought it back in and made a few little adjustments to the diameter of the inner cap, and tried it all again on the inside of a nice warm building, and found I got even better results. "18 minutes later, and that simmer is still going just fine without a problem." The tin can lid underneath the burner provides a little more reservoir for the spirit for preheating because this cap is very large and takes a lot of spirit to heat it up. So I count this as a success. This burner is now working with the original jet without any modifications to the burner. Instead, I've only modified the new version of the Taiwan cap. Unfortunately, I've noticed that the seller in Taiwan is still continuing to market their photos on eBay with a deceptive cap looking like this, and that's not the way it looks when you get it. This is what you'll see when you get a cap from Taiwan now. That cap that you see there has even fewer holes than the one I've described in this video, and you're required to use that jet in order to make it work, which is a smaller orifice and reduces the power of your number 12 stove. And that is why I started selling my number 12 cap, the Top Dog, on both iMaterialize and Shapeways. The Top Dog cap is a large cap, so unfortunately it's kind of expensive, but it allows you to use your number 12 at full power with no weird jet changes and not having to modify a cap. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, and subscribe. There's links down below.